Welcome to the Washington Watch News Desk. I'm Zachary Gohl with today's top stories. This week, Department of Homeland Security Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin claimed that the Trump administration has arrested about 600 known or suspected terrorists and about 2,700 members of the violent gang Tren de Aragua, a group known for sex trafficking, drug trafficking, and extortion. Now, the news comes amid a nationwide deportation effort that has sparked backlash and protests from Democrats across the country. McLaughlin slammed liberal politicians who are, quote, protecting such criminals. One liberal city in California advised illegal residents to actually evade ICE officers.
The city of Paris has received reports of ongoing ICE operations within the area. We urge all residents to remain calm, stay indoors when possible, and know your rights. Do not go out unless necessary. Stay at home and do not open the door to strangers.
Now, while most Democrats resist the administration's actions, some have actually chosen to embrace it. Senator John Fetterman took to X to levy his support for the agency, saying that ICE performs an important job for our country, and that calls to abolish the agency are, quote, inappropriate and outrageous. Now, moving from ICE to the Secret Service. As you will recall, President Trump was nearly assassinated 1 year ago. Ever since, Americans have demanded answers about what went wrong. Multiple investigations were initiated, with Congress launching their own inquiry. Well, now, 6 Secret Service agents have been suspended for their conduct that day. The Department of Homeland Security conducted its own review and released some rather disturbing findings. The report concluded that the Secret Service does not perform at the elite levels needed to discharge its critical mission, and that another Butler can and will happen again unless certain changes are made. Now on to trade. President Trump is threatening an additional 35% tariff on Canadian goods. Why? Well, he claims it's to force Canada to help stop the fentanyl crisis here in the United States. In a letter to the Canadian Prime Minister, President Trump blasted Canada for its failure to stop drugs pouring into the U.S. via the northern border. The United States has imposed tariffs months ago to force Canada to deal with the drug problem. Canada responded with tariffs of their own. And now, the president is doubling down. Trump did offer an olive branch, though. At the end of the letter, he said, if Canada works with me to stop the flow of fentanyl, we will perhaps consider an adjustment to this letter. When speaking to reporters, President Trump actually seemed rather optimistic.
It was sent yesterday. They called. I think it was fairly well received, but it's what we need. So we'll see what happens.
Now, we'll keep a close eye on this story as it continues to unfold. Now, in another massive development, the IRS is actually allowing churches to endorse political candidates. For decades, pastors have feared that the IRS would remove their tax-exempt status if they dared to endorse someone for public office. But they need not fear any longer. Some Christian leaders have praised the IRS, calling it the right decision, and hoping that it will cause pastors to be bolder in the pulpit. But other churches have indicated they won't take advantage of the recent announcement. In particular, the U.S. Catholic bishops declared that the new policy won't change their stance to not endorse political candidates. And those are today's headlines. I'm Zachary Gohl. You can dive deeper with the Washington Stand at washingtonstand.com. Watch this and other news in the Stand Firm mobile app, and follow us on social media for updates at FRCDC. Up next is Washington Watch with guest host Jody Heiss. We're back next week with more stories that matter.
From the heart of our nation's capital in Washington, D.C., bringing compelling interviews, insightful analysis, taking you beyond the headlines and sound bites into conversations with our nation's leaders and newsmakers, all from a biblical worldview. Sitting in for Tony is today's host, Jody Heiss.
Well, good afternoon. Welcome to this July 11th edition of Washington Watch. I am Jody Heiss, a senior fellow here at the Family Research Council, and your Friday host. So glad to have you on board with us today. Coming up on today's edition of Washington Watch, Immigration and Custom Enforcement continues to do its job, and that is to enforce our nation's laws. But the lawless left is not happy about that.
What have they accomplished except for spreading fear and terror in our community? What have they accomplished? I'm sure there's a handful of dangerous people that they detained, but we know that that is not the case. Otherwise, they would have been parading them through the media, telling us about all the horrific crimes they committed.
Well, that was Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass earlier this week on NBC's Telemundo network. Well, just maybe, if she watched something other than the leftist media outlets, she would hear about the types of criminals who are actually being rounded up.
We have arrested almost 600 known or suspected terrorists within the United States, 2,700 members of Tren de Aragua, a vicious gang that kills, rapes, and maims Americans for sport. That is who these politicians are protecting.
That was DHS Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin earlier this week, and I'll discuss this here in just a couple of moments when I'm joined by Congressman Brad Knott, who is a member of the House Homeland Security Committee. And the National Education Association recently held its annual meeting, and among the resolutions they passed was one to fight President Trump's alleged fascism. And their war cry was certainly heard loud and clear.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Say the words. Say the words. Say them. Say them out loud.
Wow, that was NEA President Becky Pringle on day one of that gathering, and we'll discuss what else came out of that four-day meeting when I'm joined a little bit later by CEO of Moms for Liberty, Tina Descovich. And also today, we'll highlight a legal effort to prevent the IRS from blackballing conservative groups who are seeking nonprofit tax-exempt status. Attorney Chris Gober will join me for that discussion a little bit later. And speaking of the IRS, that'll be one of the topics that we'll also discuss when I'm joined by David Clausen for our Biblical Worldview segment a little later in the program. So as always, we have a lot coming your way, all of it trying to hit the highlights of the week from a biblical worldview perspective. And you can always keep abreast of it all with our website, tonyperkins.com. All right, let's jump into our first topic for today. Immigration and Customs Enforcement has been working tirelessly, literally, trying to enforce our nation's immigration laws, rounding up criminals, illegal criminals, immigrants. But their work is not come without fierce and, in fact, in some sad instances, even violent resistance from the woke mob. And you can take, for just an example, the immigration raid at a marijuana farm in Southern California just yesterday, where for 4 hours there were protesters, and apparently one of them at least opened fire on federal agents. And thankfully in that incident, none of the agents were injured, but unfortunately that was far from being an isolated incident. Well, joining me now to discuss this and more is Congressman Brad Knott. He's a member of the House Homeland Security Committee and represents North Carolina's 13th Congressional District. Congressman Knott, welcome back to Washington Watch. Great to have you.
Hey, Jody, it's good to be here. Thank you.
All right, so we've got several of these immigration enforcement raids that are seemingly being met with fierce resistance from the woke mob. And so let me start with this question. Do Do Democrats, in your opinion, even some like California Governor Gavin Newsom, do they bear some responsibility for stoking the fire of the violence that we're seeing right now against these federal agents?
Absolutely. And I would push back on that. It's not just the woke mob, it's the entire Democratic Party, by and large, who are pushing back against the efforts of this administration to do two things. And those two things, of course, are to secure the border and then to remove illegal immigrants, starting with those who are most dangerous. And even in Congress, it is very common to hear people call our ICE agents the Gestapo, or compare them to Hitler's secret police, the SS. It's unbelievable. And it's unfortunately a continuing trend that I saw before I decided to run. When I was working in the Department of Justice, when I was seeing the resistance from the Biden-Harris administration to enforce our laws, they do not want any immigration enforcement. They are committed to the open borders, and the very, very dangerous effects to our own country, those are not being considered or even recognized. And they are playing with real fire here, enraging the left, enraging the illegal immigrant community against law enforcement like they're doing, and it should stop.
Yeah, great point. In fact, I had that discussion with someone earlier in the week, and we both agreed, this is beyond just the woke mob out there. It really does seem to entail virtually, if not all, of the Democratic Party. I wonder if the SPLC now is going to come out and label the Democratic Party a terrorist organization or some sort of hate group. We'll probably not hold our breath for that to happen, but an interesting question anyways. So let me, what is your reaction, your response to Governor Newsom? He's calling these immigration raids inhumane. How do you respond to that type of terminology?
Governor Newsom is the quintessential finger in the wind, whatever he needs to do to maintain relevance and to secure political power. That's all he's doing. And he knows deep down that the open border has been a catastrophe for California. In some estimates, almost 30% of healthcare costs in California are because of freeloading illegal immigrants. I mean, your listeners need to answer this question. In the country, there are probably 25 to 30 million illegal aliens. Where do they get their health care? Where do they get their health care? It's either in states like California on the government dole, or they go to the emergency room, and those costs are handed off to Americans. Governor Newsom should know better. I was in California not too long ago, and their state has been overrun by an illegal immigration swell that has really, it's almost divided the state into two separate Californias. And it's absolutely unacceptable. And so he knows better, I hope. And he is just trying to score cheap political points at the expense of his own state.
Yeah, very interesting perspective there. When you look at all the violence that is intertwined in all of this, it certainly is not unique simply to California. I mean, this week we had 11 people arrested for attempted murder charges on an attempted ambush near Dallas. In fact, one officer there was shot in the neck. Are we watching, Congressman, I don't know, some sort of version of defund the police 2.0? Is it that type of thing, do you think, that we're witnessing with all of this?
Well, I think we have to come to grips with the fact that the Democratic Party, a greater percentage of that party is the radical left. And the radical left truly hates the structures that have enabled Western civilization to flourish. One of those is, of course, law and order. And whether it's the border, whether it is coming down on violence, on vandalism, on assaulting our police, whatever it may be, it really enrages the extreme elements of the Democratic Party. And it's a tremendous problem. But you look at the Democratic Party, look at their mayor, the candidate for mayor in New York City. He is an unapologetic anti-Semitic communist. He has championed the phrase globalize the intifada. This is where the Democratic Party is now. And any type of traditional conservatism or American jurisprudence, American law enforcement, they really do get inflamed. And it's a huge problem. But let me just put this one note in there. The violence that I'm most concerned about is not the crazy college kids who live in their parents' basement. It is the violence that will come to our streets if we have open borders. Around the world, there are some of the most heinous people who are plotting to come, if they're not here already, into the United States. And they lay dormant for a while. But you import the third world, you import people who want to cut people's heads off or shoot their rivals. That violence will show up in the American streets before too long. We've already seen the effects, whether it's with drugs or human trafficking, but it is only going to grow worse if we don't get ahead of this problem. So I commend the president and hope we can keep that effort. Yeah.
Yeah, great point. And I hope you heard it coming into this, but we were talking about DHS Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin actually has said that they've captured almost 600 known or suspected terrorists who have been arrested, and some 2,700 members of the gang Tren de Aragua. You would think people would be happy that these type of people, individuals, are being caught, apprehended. Tell me real quickly, you've got a couple of bills that I want you to explain dealing with these type of things, and both of them have passed out of their respective committees. Briefly, give us a highlight of what these bills are.
The first bill, I think, is the most important piece of legislation for illegal immigration in this Congress. And it's built on my experience as a federal prosecutor, and it essentially categorizes anyone who is here illegally in a separate slate if they commit a crime. If they're convicted of a crime, they are subject to enhanced penalties. And then secondly, if they return to the country a second time illegally, they will be subjected to harsher penalties. And there are two goals here. One is to protect the American citizens from people who are here illegally that want to commit crimes. But second, is to deter those from coming back a second time after deportation. I prosecuted people who returned more than a dozen times illegally because they don't fear the American legal system. We must recognize this threat, address this threat, and hope to deter it into the future. The second bill I introduced, it basically tasks a study and then an action plan on how to deal with Tren de Aragua. They're in about 15 different countries in the Western Hemisphere. They're very proficient at embedding themselves in society, laying dormant, and then metastasizing with violence, with drug trafficking, with human trafficking. And again, the Department of Homeland Security needs to study it and then put an action plan together on how to remove this blight once and for all. So those are my two bills that we've gotten out of committee, and the House will be voting on them soon, I hope.
Outstanding. Those are two excellent bills. Congressman Brad Knott, we want to keep a track on that. We'd love to have you come back on and keep us posted on how those are developing and how they're moving forward. You know, and it comes at such a time, I'm sure you saw that data recently analyzed by the Center for Immigration Studies found that sanctuary states released some 25,000 criminal illegals back into our population between October and February. Just unbelievable. Yep. And then you have also what seems to be the left is okay with some 300,000 missing children that have come across the border, and very few of them have been found. So this is just an unprecedented time that we're living in, and I want to thank you for the incredible work that you're doing there on Capitol Hill. We've got just 20 seconds. Your final thoughts before we take off.
Thank you for having me, and I'll just remind everybody, we have a precious country that we must steward. And if we don't take immigration seriously, if we're not carefully vetting people to come in, we're going to pay the price. And we've got to do that. Protect legal immigrants and deter illegal. And that's my final word.
Brad Knott, North Carolina, thank you so much for joining us. All right, friends, Mom for Liberty CEO will join me next. You don't want to miss what's coming up.
The family is the oldest, most tested, and most reliable unit of society. It is divinely created and sustained. And yet, there are those who are always tampering with its values and structure. That's why we need organizations like the Family Research Council that can effectively defend and strengthen the family.
Family Research Council began over 40 years ago, like all great movements of God, with prayer. Today, rooted in the heart of the nation's capital, FRC continues to champion faith, family, and freedom in public policy and the culture from a biblical worldview.
FRC is one of those bright lights that helps us focus on true north. And I shudder to think, had they not been here, that it could have been worse, worse, worse.
The Family Research Council is key. It's one of a handful of groups that I think will determine whether our children live in a country that enjoyed all of the freedom and all the opportunity that we enjoyed in this great land.
It's just a wonderful parachurch organization that doesn't seek to take the place of the church, but it seeks to assist the family and the church as we try to move forward successfully, not in a defensive mode, but in an offensive mode as we seek to live our lives according to the Holy Scriptures.
FRC is not going to be whooped. We're going to fight. We're going to take a stand. And again, we don't retreat.
You will never see in front of this building here in Washington, D.C., a white flag fly. We will never step back. We will never surrender, and we will never be silent.
Hello, friends. This is Tony Perkins. You know what? We just finished our 21-day Family Bible Challenge through the book of Matthew. And if you joined us, I pray that it has already borne fruit in your life and in your home as you place the Lord and His Word at the center of your home. Now, our journey through the Bible doesn't end here, though. The challenge was a part of our Stand on the Word Bible reading plan. And from here, we're going to cover the rest of the New Testament. And now that we finished the book of Matthew, let me ask you, would you consider joining us for the rest of the journey through the Word of God? In 10 to 15 minutes a day, you'll see how the good news of Jesus transformed the lives of common people just like you and me, and how those same people transformed the known world through the power of the Holy Spirit. I invite you to continue the journey with me and discover the life-enriching power of the Word of God. Visit frc.org/Bible for our reading plan. That's frc.org/Bible to learn more.
Welcome back to Washington Watch. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am Jody Heiss, your Friday host, and an honor to be with you. All right, last weekend, the National Education Association held its 2025 Representative Assembly meeting in Portland, Oregon. And throughout the Teachers Union meeting, the delegates there doubled down on things like pushing to get LGBT events into more schools, how to usurp parents' rights to know about their kids' education, and that, in fact, even in spite of the fact that the Supreme Court recently spoke to that issue. But they did so much more. And of course, I guess predictably, they also, their delegates voted to fight President Trump's alleged fascism. So what else were they up to? Well, here to share more about this is Tina Descovich. She's the co-founder and CEO of Moms for Liberty. Tina, welcome to Washington Watch. Great to have you.
Thanks, Jody, for having me on. I'm looking forward to chatting about the great National Education Association.
Well, let me start with this clip. I think this is a great place to start.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Say the words. Say the words. Say them. Say them out loud.
Wow. All right, so you were tracking this teachers union meeting. What struck you most about the proceedings that took place?
What's most striking about the NEA conferences every summer since I've been following what they're doing is that they actually don't discuss and don't vote on anything that has to do with education. It's quite remarkable. You know, in the United States, about a third of fourth graders can read proficiently. You heard that right. 1/3 can read proficiently. And yet they don't address that issue at all. They address things like you said in the intro about how to insert LGBTQ curriculum, even after the Supreme Court said just last week that parents can opt out. We had one of our moms as a petitioner in a Supreme Court case from Montgomery County, Maryland. And parents, you know, the Supreme Court verified again that parents do have the fundamental right to raise their children and opt them out. And, the NEA spends its time saying, no, parents, you don't know best. Your children do need to learn LGBTQ and gender ideology. We need to teach them that they can be a boy or a girl, neither or both.
Well, it really is just stunning and alarming. It's exceedingly alarming, the leadership of where the teachers union is going. And among other things, there's so much we could discuss, but they basically are calling President Trump a fascist. Were you in any way surprised by the fact that delegates okayed that particular business item?
Sometimes I'm shocked that I'm still shocked, to be honest. I've been following them for, 5 or 6 years now. And even in the past few years, they vote on things like abortion. They've been voting on Middle East policies for several years now. What in the world does that have to do with education and teaching kids to read and write and do math? This year, they voted on numerous things that are, astonishing. Using the term fascism when referring to President Trump's policies, like you said, they voted to cut ties with anti-Semitism groups. They voted just on numerous things that have absolutely nothing to do with educating children.
Yeah, and I mean, that is a great point. That's a question that they need to answer, quite frankly. You actually described the NEA as lighting the fire but playing victim. I thought that was a great word picture. Go a little bit further into depth as to what you mean by that.
Because the NEA and all the teachers unions, even local teachers unions, they come after Moms for Liberty and parents that are standing up for things like school choice or the right to raise their children, but most specifically school choice. They constantly say that parents that want to choose to homeschool or private school or public charter school are trying to destroy public education. And Moms for Liberty as a whole, they've been telling us since the day we launched that we are out to destroy public education. There couldn't be anything further from the truth. I served on a public school board for 4 years, and I actually believe that there is a role for public education and it should serve the public well. But the union says you're trying to destroy public education. Meanwhile, the union actually is spending all of their time on doing everything but educating children. And I don't want to jump all the way back to 2020, but let's reflect on who is trying to keep schools closed the longest. The LA Teachers Union in 2020 and 2021 said they wouldn't open until they agreed to defund the police. Again, absolutely nothing to do with education. They were holding children hostage. And so what we want to see happen is that we want Congress to revoke their charter. They are the only labor union in the country that has a federal charter, is the National Education Association. And so you probably know a lot of people right now that we're talking to on Capitol Hill that are drafting language right now to revoke this charter.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea and something that certainly needs to happen. If there's anyone who's trying to destroy public education, it would be the NEA, quite frankly. As you referenced, they're the ones that's doing everything but education. So let me ask you, because you brought this up, Tina, what would your advice be to parents in our audience who are watching or listening right now who may not be able to feasibly homeschool their kids or put them in Christian private schools? What would you say to them?
You have to do what's best for your child and your family. And unfortunately, sometimes you are left with a public school option only. You have to be an involved parent. You have to be proactive, not reactive. These things are in your schools all across the country. We are in 48 states, 320 counties. And I will tell you, parents are coming to us all the time with their children that have been harmed by policies where there's boys in their daughters' bathrooms, there's boys in their daughters' sports, lessons that have been taught to them that they can change their gender. These things are happening. And so if your child is still in public school, you must be proactive. Check those backpacks. Ask to see what they're reading before they're reading it. Ask to opt out. You can go to our website, momsforliberty.org. We've created forms and tools for you to opt your children out. The Supreme Court has said it is your right to opt your children out of these things. We will help you do that. You have to take a stand and be a strong parent to protect them against what's going on in public schools right now.
Well, I just want to say thank you, Tina, to you and everyone there at Moms for Liberty, a relatively young organization, but one that has just become a powerhouse in our country for standing up for the rights of moms and kids and education, and you're so on the tip of the spear. I want to say thank you for the incredible work that each of you do there at Moms for Liberty. Tina Descovich with Moms for Liberty, thank you so much for joining us today on Washington Watch.
Thanks, Jody, for having me on.
You're very welcome. God bless. All right, coming up, the IRS's facts and circumstances test was weaponized against conservatives during the Obama administration. Well, that test is still around, and we'll talk about it right after the break.
The Center for Biblical Worldview's all-day workshops delves into the formation of a worldview, what it is, how it's formed, when it's formed, what that means to them personally and their churches and communities.
My hope for people when they come to these worldview workshops is that they will come away better equipped to engage the people and the ideas that they're living with and around. And our goal is to give people more confidence in the gospel, in the fact that what God said to us actually is true, actually is the path to happiness and human flourishing for all of us, but also more confidence in their ability to have these conversations and help lead other people to the truth.
For Bible-believing Christians to know what God's Word says on these issues and to learn how they can apply it to their lives. And we believe that the more Christians that we equip, that's how we'll change the nation.
Hey fam, listen, Pastor Sammy here at Lighthouse Church, and I cannot tell you how equipping, how empowering, how incredibly educating this conference has been. And so I just want to encourage anybody that either has not been part of or is thinking about hosting this event, certainly to pastors, leaders, even CEOs for that matter. This conference is lights out. I stand behind it myself. I can't commend it enough. We're going to be talking about this for some time to come.
The culture is kind of squeezing in on us as God's people, forcing those of us with biblical views to change those views or to suppress those views. It's forcing us to engage with issues that we've never had to engage with. And so what this teaches us is what those issues are, what the Bible says about those issues, and then how we can critically engage our culture on these things in a way that is committed to biblical principle.
Visit frc.org/worldview for more information.
Welcome back to Washington Watch. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm your host, Jody Heiss. All right, earlier this month, a legal case brought against the IRS finally got its day in court, and it could have some major implications down the road for countless conservative organizations. So what is the issue in this case? Well, here now to share more about it is Chris Gover. He's the founding partner and CEO at Lex Politica, who represents the organization in this case. Chris, welcome to Washington Watch. Great to see you.
Hey, Jody, how are you? Been too long.
It has been too long. I know a lot of our viewers and listeners will not know this, but you and I have a history together ourselves. When I had to go before Fannie Willis's grand jury, you were there defending me and did an excellent job then, as you have done with so many, and you continue your outstanding work, and it's an honor to have you today.
Yeah, well, great. It's great to see you. Great to see you here. So, not in Fulton County courthouses and sham litigation. So,
hey, listen, you got that right. Underscore.
But they say, habits die hard. So, can I bill you for this here?
I'm not going to answer that one. All right, now. Listen, let's begin this because this is an important case you're working on now. Let's start, kind of jog our memory, if you would, Chris, on the 2014 IRS Lois Lerner scandal. Of course, she was then the director of the IRS's exempt organizations unit. Fill us in a little bit of that.
Yeah, so this case really goes back, you got to look all the way back to 2010. In 2011. We founded a group called Freedom Path, a 501c4 issue advocacy organization that sought its tax-exempt status with the IRS back in 2011. And then after years of delay of just waiting for the IRS to do something with this application, we suddenly get a letter in the mail that says, we want to know more. Please send us a list of all of your donors, and all of this really irrelevant information, regarding the tax exempt status. So something was fishy there. Well, it wasn't long after that the whole Lois Lerner scandal broke, and we realized that this organization, Freedom Path, had been kind of targeted by Lois Lerner and her cronies because they had freedom in the name. If you recall, any group with Tea Party in the name, freedom in the name, anything, I guess, sounding, too American for them, they would, target and hold. So this really dates back to that period of time. We filed a lawsuit against them in 2014 that has seen various courts, and now 11 years later, we actually have the most substantive hearing we've had in this case, since that time.
Wow. All right, so we've got the facts and circumstances test and how it was used to weaponize the IRS against conservatives. Explain that to us.
Yeah, so the IRS uses a test. This is not even a statutory test that originated with Congress. Rather, it's kind of through interpretation and rulemaking through the IRS, and it's been in existence for decades. But the IRS uses the so-called facts and circumstances test, which is a 11-factor test of a bunch of highly subjective factors that they frankly say they can weight it differently from one communication to the next, or actually even take into consideration other factors that aren't a part of the list. But this is the test that importantly determines, is a group engaged in issue advocacy of the type that's in furtherance of its tax exempt status, or is it engaged in some kind of political campaign intervention that could jeopardize that tax exempt status? And so what happens in practice with this really vague and subjective test is, if you have an IRS agent that's sitting there and they're looking at a particular organization and judging its communications and its expenditures, the fact of the matter is that IRS agent can come to whatever conclusion they so desire, because the test is so subjective in nature that it's basically, you can just use the test to find whatever conclusion you want to get to. And that's what allows the IRS to really engage in a lot of these abuses, because they don't have to stick to an objective standard that everybody on both sides understands. They can kind of hide behind the vagueness of it. And that's where we see so many conservative organizations getting targeted unfairly by a bunch of government bureaucrats.
Okay, so we've got about a minute and a half left here. In the midst of all that vagueness, Chris Gobert, what are you asking the courts to do? What are you hoping to come out with?
Yeah. What we're wanting is the facts and circumstances test to be struck down as unconstitutional. We want there to be new rules in place that the IRS has to use to determine, what is political campaign intervention? What is issue advocacy? In effect, we're asking the IRS to do what the United States Supreme Court has already told the Federal Election Commission to do. Because the Federal Election Commission used to have a very similar test that was the result of the McCain-Feingold bill back in 2001. That test got struck down as unconstitutional by the United States Supreme Court. And basically, the IRS kind of continues to run their very kind of analogous test. So we want the court to do the same. We want to create, new rules to be drafted to make sure that conservative organizations can't be unfairly targeted in the future.
Well, Chris Gobert, CEO of Lex Politica, I want to thank you so much again. Let me just say it for the outstanding work you've done and you continue to do. This has got to come to a stop. IRS targeting of conservative organizations, and thank you right now for leading that charge. We're certainly going to be keeping a close watch on this. Thank you for joining us on Washington Watch.
All right, thanks, Jody.
All right, on the other side of the break, FRC's David Clausen is going to be joining me for our weekly biblical worldview discussion. And boy, we've got a lot to talk about, so don't go anywhere. We'll be back on the other side of the break. Stay tuned.
Family Family Research Council is committed to advancing faith, family, and freedom from the East Coast to the West. So FRC is going to Southern California for this year's Pray, Vote, Stand Summit, October 17th and 18th at Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills. Join us for this powerful gathering of Christians desiring cultural renewal and spiritual revival. The Pray, Vote, Stand Summit brings together Christian leaders, issue experts, and government officials for a time of prayer, inspiration, and action. Together, we will seek God's guidance for our nation and engage in meaningful discussions on the intersection of faith, government, and culture. If the spiritual foundations and the cultural walls of our nation are to be rebuilt, we all have a role to play. May we each find our place on the wall as we build for biblical truth. Register now at prayvotestand.org. That's prayvotestand.org.
Jennifer, it's so exciting to be here with you today talking about our new book, Embracing God's Design. Who is actually going to benefit from reading this book in your view?
There's so many different audiences that can benefit. The first one are counselors themselves, right? Because we have some material in there where we really address the gender dysphoria diagnosis and what is wrong with it. We have information for people who are wanting to go back to embracing God's design for their life.
This is really magical to have the therapist and the individual who suffered come together and write about why this is happening and why we're seeing this.
And we brought all of that experience to the table. We want to see people walking in the fullness of who God has called them to be and not a false identity.
Order today at embracethedesign.com.
How should Christians think about the thorny issues shaping our culture? How should Christians address deceitful ideas like transgenderism, critical theory, or assisted suicide? How can Christians navigate raising children in a broken culture, the war on gender roles, or rebuilding our once great nation? Outstanding is a podcast from the Washington Stand dedicated to these critical conversations. Outstanding seeks to tear down what our corrupt culture lifts up with an aim to take every thought and every idea captive to the obedience of Christ. Whether policies or partisan politics, whether conflict in America or conflict abroad, join us and our guests as we examine the headlines through the lens of Scripture and explore how Christians can faithfully exalt Christ in all of life. Follow Outstanding on your favorite podcast app and look for new episodes each week.
Thank you for joining us today on Washington Watch. I'm your Friday host, Jody Heiss. And before I get to my final guest, I've got an action item for you, and I really hope you'll pay attention to this. The Trump administration has signaled its intent to cut some woke programs, specifically from PEPFAR. Now, you've heard us talk a lot about PEPFAR. Some of you may not know what that stands for. PEPFAR is the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. So we call it PEPFAR for short. But it's being changed all around. Its intent is to provide some life-changing and life-saving treatment. But it is not intended to, which it is now being used as, to promote abortion and all sorts of radical ideologies. And so the Rescissions Act that just went through certainly is a step in the right direction, but there's a major lobbying campaign that's underway right now to shame Republican senators into rejecting any cuts whatsoever to PEPFAR. So we need you to contact the Senate to stop PEPFAR from funding abortion, from funding LGBT advocacy, and all these things that it was not intended to fund. So you can be a part of this. Simply text the word PEPFAR, that's PEPFAR, PEPFAR to 67742, and we'll send you a link so that your voice can be heard. Again, that's PEPFAR to 67742. All right. No shortage of items in the news this week, as we all know, and they all deserve our attention, our thoughtful attention as Christians and to look at these items through the lens of Scripture. And we like to do that each week here on this program, ending the week with a biblical worldview segment, looking at the highlights of the week through a biblical perspective. And joining us today is David Clausen, who joins us most every Friday. Of course, he is the director here at the Center for Biblical Worldview at the Family Research Council. He's also the author of the recent book, Life After Roe, Equipping Christians in the Fight for Life Today. David, as always, welcome back to the program. Great to have you.
Happy Friday. Great to be with you, Jody.
Happy Friday to you as well. All right, David, I don't know where else to start. We have to begin with the aftermath of the floods in Texas. At this point, some 120 plus lives. Most are telling us that number is likely to exceed 200. And almost immediately when all this happened, David, I was offended, I was hurt, I was upset that the media almost immediately began to blame President Trump for the Texas floods and somehow politicize all of this. That's kind of become the national way, the political way to deal with these sorts of things. But on the other hand, you saw Christians responding in an entirely different way, from prayer vigils to mourning and praying and getting their feet and hands dirty trying to help out. So let me just 30,000 foot view, your reaction from those two perspectives on the Texas floods this week.
Yeah, Jody, as Christians, our first impulse, our first response is really the biblical category of lament. Romans 12:15 says that we mourn with those who mourn. And when you're thinking about just the scale of this tragedy and the innocent loss of life, as Christians, we lament. We lament the pain and the grief. I can't imagine, Jody, I'm a new father, and the idea that some of these parents are getting calls that their young girls, that the Christian Girls Camp Mystic, were washed away in the flood. That is just horrifying. It's unimaginable. And of course, as you said, the media's impulse to politicize it, this is, we've seen this show before. Whenever there's kind of a mass shooting or a natural disaster, in the case of a shooting, the discussion immediately goes to guns. In the case of a natural disaster, you hear talk about climate change. And we can have those debates, but in the immediate aftermath, I think as Christians, we lament, we grieve, we empathize. You mentioned that prayer vigil. I actually watched clips of that this morning. That's what Christians do. We go to our Father in a posture of trust. We come alongside one another. We bear each other's burdens. And I think for those of us around the country, we just need to continue to pray for our brothers and sisters who are walking through something that really is unimaginable.
Well, David, I had personally two members of Congress, and I'll not mention their names right now, but one of them had two of his daughters who were at Camp Mystic during that time. The other had two granddaughters that were there. Fortunately, those daughters and granddaughters were saved, but one of the cousins of one of those members was not saved. She lost her life. And I had some believers on the ground that we have been in touch with, and some of them contacted me miraculously. They had found some of the personal items from the little cousin who lost her life, and we were able to work out with the family. And just yesterday, those items were delivered on the front door of their home. But the mourning that you described is so real and so deep. And the prayers of the body of Christ across this country, the involvement of Christians has been so encouraging, and I think you were spot on with that. I think we could spend the rest of our time on the Texas floods, but if I can, David, let me transition a little. Let me stay in Texas. At least we'll stay in Texas. But Baylor University, they've had quite an interesting week this week. They had an LGBTQ research grant, but because of so much opposition, they have rescinded that grant and sent back the money. Tell us what's going on there at Baylor.
Yeah, for anyone who missed this story, on June 30th, Baylor University put out a press release kind of celebrating a grant of $643,000. So again, this is no small grant. This is a significant grant. And the grant was given to promote LGBT inclusion and belonging in the church. Now, what's interesting, Jody, again, this June 30th press release no longer exists because, as you mentioned, after the backlash, the university has said we won't accept the grant anymore. But let me go back to that press release. Even though it doesn't exist anymore, I have some screenshots. And here's really interesting what this, again, $643,000 was going to go towards at a historically Baptist university. Here's what the press release said, Jody. It says, through academic research, this grant will help us better understand the disenfranchisement and exclusion of LGBTQIA plus individuals and women within congregations to nurture institutional courage and foster change. And it goes on to talk about how many LGBTQIA plus individuals and women experience institutional betrayal within their faith communities. And it says, the whole point of this study that they were going to do was going to try to help congregations develop greater sensitivity and trauma-informed approaches to ministry for, again, those who identify on the whole alphabet soup of LGBTQ issues. And again, so if this kind of research grant sounds like what you would expect from a far-left progressive university, you can be excused for thinking this is the kind of research you think maybe Union Theological Seminary or some other really progressive school might do. Not Baylor, though, because Baylor is still affiliated with the General Baptist Convention of Texas, which, by the way, affirms the Baptist Faith and Message 2000, which has a very strong position on human sexuality and marriage. And so, again, after the backlash, Jody, they've said that they won't take the money, they'll give it back. But I guess the final thing I'd add, this isn't too surprising to me. It was exactly 10 years ago that Baylor kind of quietly eliminated from its student code of conduct a clause that had explicitly prohibited homosexual behavior. It was a really clear statement, and they replaced it with a really watered-down statement. And so, again, I think this is a cautionary tale. I think Baylor still feels this connection to their Baptist heritage, but it's kind of trying to sit on the fence and have it both ways, so to speak. So I'm grateful that the pushback resulted in kind of Baylor getting a little pie on their face and being embarrassed by this. But when you have really watered-down statements on sexuality, it's not a real sign of health for the organization.
Yeah, and I had not seen the post that you just read. That was very interesting. One of the things that stuck out to me while you were reading it is how they refer to individuals and women, as though women are not individuals to start with. There is something that's being said even in that kind of statement. They made it a couple of times. If I can, David, let's switch gears. Let's go to a little bit broader topic from the IRS making the announcement this week regarding the Johnson Amendment, which, by the way, is the whole issue that drove me to Congress as a pastor to begin with. But this decision, it was made in a court filing in an ongoing lawsuit in Texas. It provides a carve-out in the Johnson Amendment. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Jody, I just, again, want to congratulate you. I know that this is an issue that you've been advocating on for years. Like you said, it got you into politics. I know you were on the program earlier this week with Tony, and I would commend our viewers and listeners to go watch the conversation the two of you had with Congressman Mark Harris, a Southern Baptist pastor from North Carolina. But for those who might be unfamiliar with the whole history here, Jody, this is a provision of the tax code that was introduced in 1954 by then Senator Lyndon Johnson. He really put it in the tax code because he was upset that two nonprofits in Texas opposed his reelection for the U.S. Senate. But again, over the decades, again, this provision basically says nonprofits, including churches, can't engage in direct politicking endorsing candidates, things like that. But again, it's had a real chilling effect on pastors. And in my view, pastors still had broad free speech protection, but think about organizations like the Family Research Council. I've been here long enough to go through a couple of election cycles. Every 2 years, we'll have to put out information for pastors, kind of the do's and don'ts, because people are legitimately nervous about losing tax-exempt status. And so one of the things that groups like FRC Action will do in an election is try to help people navigate that, because it's a real fear that I think the left successfully kind of was able to weaponize against us. And so that's why this is such a big deal, Jody. On July 8th, like you said, the IRS filed what's called a consent decree that essentially clarifies that churches have these free speech rights. A pastor now can endorse, if they want to, from the pulpit. And of course, we can talk about the wisdom and propriety of that, but I think it's always been ridiculous, bordering on unconstitutional, to threaten churches over their free speech rights.
Yeah, and religious liberty. I mean, if there is anywhere where religious liberty, the epicenter of that is a church, and the centerpiece of that obviously is the pulpit. As you bring that up, not surprisingly, a lot of people on the left are not excited about this announcement. People like Governor Gavin Newsom, for example. I want to play a clip for you of what he had to say when he was asked about this by a reporter. Let's play this clip, and we'll get your reaction.
Called gaming the system in every way. I mean, I think it's pretty cynical that the IRS just all of a sudden changes those rules. So I don't know if it's healthy. I don't even know if it's legal, but it's unsurprising, and I just find it politically convenient and cynical.
Interesting to me, I've never seen Governor Newsom in a church. Maybe he's been there before. I'm not saying he hasn't, but he's making this statement with stained glass behind him and all. All right, so give me your reaction to this. Is it gaming the system, according to Governor Newsom?
Well, no. And Jody, here's the thing. Again, this Johnson Amendment really has created kind of a culture of fear and confusion amongst conservative, theologically conservative, evangelical pastors. And that is so rich from the governor. I have to add, this is someone who has weaponized Scripture, pulled it out of context to really advance his own political agenda, putting up billboards in states around the countries to support abortion rights. Again, very, very rich. But again, we need to be clear about one thing, Jody. This whole talk about pastors using the pulpit for politics, the conversation seems to only go one way. For decades, historically black churches have invited politicians to essentially hold campaign rallies in their churches. Think about 2008, Obama campaign surrogate, or I guess I should say pastor, Jeremiah Wright, using his pulpit to talk about those issues. You have Raphael Warnock, senator from Georgia, who launched, your home state, Jody, who launched his political career from the pulpit of Ebenezer Baptist Church. And so again, the criticism about the Johnson Amendment, it only really seems to be directed towards those who are on the political right. And so again, I think the fact that the IRS has made this decision, it evens the playing field.
All right, so let's go into this. Only less than a couple of minutes that we have, David. What do you say to pastors who practically, what would you say to them, advise them moving forward once this is a done deal? Is this going to change their ministry in terms of shepherding their flock?
I don't think so, Jody. Again, this all it says is pastors have their free speech rights. They have religious freedom protections. Again, I believe that the church and the state, I believe in the doctrine of sphere sovereignty, that they have independent authority that exists directly from God. It's a delegated authority from God. The church doesn't have to get permission from the state to exist. Now, do I want my pastor on election day to go through a ballot in the pulpit telling, to vote for water commissioner and everything along the ballot? That'd probably be unwise in many situations. But I can imagine, Jody, in some situations where it might be prudent. I think 1930s Germany, I think it would have been appropriate for a pastor to tell his congregation from the pulpit, vote against the guy running against the Nazis. And so again, I think this comes to, it's an issue of propriety, it's an issue of wisdom. And I think what's exciting about this is now pastors, in consultation with their elders and folks in their leadership, they can decide what is right and appropriate come election time.
Excellent information. David Clausen, thank you as always for bringing a biblical perspective to the news highlights of the week. It's always great to have you. Hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. God bless.
God bless you as well. All right, David Clausen, Director of the Center for Biblical Worldview here at FRC. Hope you have a fantastic weekend. We'll be back at it next week here on Washington Watch, so we'll see you then. Have a great weekend. God bless.
Washington Watch with Tony Perkins is brought to you by Family Research Council and is entirely listener-supported. Portions of the show discussing candidates are brought to you by Family Research Council Action. For more information on anything you heard today, or to find out how you can partner with us in our ongoing efforts to promote faith, family, and freedom, visit TonyPerkins.com.